Okay, I'm making this video because I just had a talk with my mother about her ancestry DNA results, which are a little bit sketchy in some parts, and also the comparison to mine, which were changed after I bought my test a couple years ago, and my results were changed in such a way that it fully removed my grandfather's country from my results. You know, my paternal grandfather, he's from the Cape Verde Islands, and in my new results that have been changed to glorify specific African nations that I don't come from because I got a separate test for the black part of my DNA from a company owned by black scientists. So I know these other nations that they added onto my results after they removed my dad's father from the islands, and they removed the Cape Verde Islands from my results. I know I'm not descended from those other African nations that they added on because, again, I got a separate test from a company owned by black scientists for the black part of my DNA. So what's really pissing me off is that not only does my mother not care that our DNA test results have been changed and tampered with and distorted, not only does she not care about the fraud, but she's happy and excited because she had found just one Nigerian who's not from any of our maternal tribes who left Nigeria and came here to America, and she thinks that person is related to her. And I told her, yeah, that person might have had sex with somebody who's from one of our tribes, but I told her that doesn't mean we're descended from Nigeria. I told my mom our people are merchant nomads. They don't have a nation. They don't have a territory. They just travel buying, selling, and trading. This is what they've done for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That's what I'm trying to tell my mom. And I'm trying to tell her the only ancestors we have on the African side that's not nomads is from Senegal. I try to tell her, and she's just getting so happy and so excited that she found just one and only one Nigerian who's supposed to be related to her and moved over here. And like I said, she does not care about any of the fraud. She does not care about any of the changing and distortion of my results that was done on my test that I ordered in 2018. She doesn't care about the changes they made after I received my results. She doesn't care about the fact that I was locked out of my account and blocked from seeing my own results after they changed what it says. I don't even have access to whatever it is that she's looking at, and what's there. I know it's fraud because Cape Verde Islands did show on my results in 2018, and they took it off of there now. After they locked me out of my account, I don't have access to change whatever they're displaying to the public because they blocked me out after removing my grandfather's islands and some other things. But anyhow, with that said, here's the reason why I'm upset over my mom ignoring all of the fraud on my results that was done after they blocked me out of my account. Here's why I'm upset about the fraud and distortion that they likely did on her results too. And here's why I'm upset over her getting excited about just one Nigerian coming over here to America now who's supposed to allegedly be related. I'm upset because there are many, there were already black people here throughout North and South America long before the Europeans got here. That's who built all these pyramids, all throughout North America, including the 70 pyramids here in Ohio. That's who built all the stone pyramids in South America. We already had some black people here. It was not just Mongols here by themselves. These are our temples that we built on both sides of the ocean and off the coast of Cuba and Japan. Our people did that, okay? And yes, we have some ancestry from slaves, but we already had ancestors who's from here in the Americas. I'm upset because black people like my mother are just so obsessed with trying to fit in, with so obsessed with trying to be Nigerian or trying to be Ghanaian, that they're abandoning the cultures that their mother taught them. They're abandoning the culture that their great grandmother taught them. They're sitting there taking sides with foreigners from dying overpopulated lands. They want to take on that religion. They want to take on that culture from Nigerians, from Ghanaians, from Arabs, from dying foreign lands. And yes, we do have some African ancestry, but there are a lot of tribes that intermixed with the indigenous people during and after slavery, and they're not Nigerian. They're not from Ghana. Nigerians have had conflict with Fulani tribe and many other tribe peoples for many years. Most of the people who sold here came here as prisoners of war. The tribes that show on the real DNA results for the African part of our DNA from a black company, it clearly shows that most likely our ancestors came here as a result of being defeated in war and then being sold to the Europeans as prisoners of war. That means Nigerians have fought with some of the tribes we're descended from for a long, long time. And people like my mother, they want to run to the religion and culture of people from dying lands, the same Nigerians, the same Arabs who defeated our merchant nomad tribes in war and sold our people as property to America. The same black folks who cursed the African part of our bloodlines. They want to get excited and be a part of that religion and part of that culture. And those are the same families that defeated them in war and sold them and cursed their bloodline. I'm not okay with that. Yeah, a lot of these families that are coming over from Nigeria and Ghana and Sudan and a lot of these places, a lot of them were enemies of our tribes who cursed our bloodlines and never reversed any of the curses, never openly admitted to any of it, never apologized for any of it. And they are benefiting in millions of dollars. They are making millions of dollars every year off the fact that DNA companies that are not owned by black scientists are removing specific ethnic groups that we're descended from in reality and replacing it with Nigeria, replacing it with Ghana, to tie us to the same people who attacked our tribes and sold us as property and cursed us in the African part of our DNA. They also want to cover up and hide the fact that we're also descended from Negro people who built all these temples through the Americas that's thousands of years old. They want to remove the fact that we're descended from the Mongols too. They're removing us from this land. They brainwashed all of our men, just about, and not almost all of our men, including T.D. Jakes, into thinking we're masculine and into thinking there's something wrong with us. And they're doing this because their land is dying. With climate change, the climate is not solely just becoming more chaotic. The soil that these people use to grow food in Nigeria and Ghana and in the Arab nations, the soil in Sudan, their soil is depleted. The amount of nutrition in their soil is quickly running out. They know they're not going to be able to grow any food in the next 40 to 50 years, right? And here we are in America. We're descended, we're descended from both some slaves, but also the Black people who were here for thousands of years building temples and pyramids to mathematical perfection in North and South America. We are one of the smallest ethnic groups in America. American Black people are less than 12% of the population when you exclude all the people who have been brought over more recently from all these different nations who did none, and all these different families who did none of the hard work to make ancient America what it was, who did none of the hard work to make modern America what it was. And now they're trying to run over here. They've got all of our people brainwashed into thinking that we're birthing more than enough women for all of our men to have 2 to 30 wives each, when that's actually not true. They've got all of our people brainwashed into thinking it is true, so they can send our sons to foster care and let both races rape them, so they can send our men to prison, so they can drive our men crazy, so they can indoctrinate our men with Islam and have our men thinking that we need to get our head cut off because we don't breed like ants. We don't produce a tsunami of daughters like Europeans and Africans. We don't. These people, they have already convinced almost all of our men that we're the root of all their problems, that we need to die. They've convinced our men that we need to get our heads cut off. They've convinced most of our men, and not solely Pastor T.D. Jakes, that there's something wrong with us. And they've done this because they don't want to have smaller families in Europe and in white communities. They don't want to have smaller families in Africa. They don't want to have smaller families in Arab countries. They don't want to raise their sons to treat their women better. They don't want to practice selective breeding. So before the nutrition runs out in their soils during the next 40, 50 years, they've already got most of our men brainwashed against us. They've already got it to where our men almost never marry us because they're trying to marry a woman of non-color. They're trying to marry an African. They're trying to marry an Arab. They're trying to marry a European who has a tsunami of daughters and to just leave us abandoned. They rarely marry us at this point. That most of them wholly believe that our culture, our selective breeding practices is the root of the problems, and it's not. It's these foreign women and these foreign men. Their nation is dying, and Europe is no different. France collects billions of dollars from African nations every year. Europe needs millions of tons of food from African nations and Europe and Ukraine and all over the world imported every year. If Europe, especially France, because they're the biggest offender, if Europe was not getting all those billions of dollars and millions of tons of food from Africa, Asia, and all these different countries every year, then France would probably be a third world country. France would have a tsunami of daughters living in rundown, dilapidated shacks and mud huts if they were not getting billions of dollars and millions of tons of food from other nations every year. They would be just as poor as the Africans. And we have all these people from the families, because America was built by Black families who were brilliant engineers and also built up by Mongol families from Asia. All those pyramids across North America, South America, and Egypt, and Sudan, and Japan, and China, that was us. And we get none of the credit for that. Most of the foods that put Italy and France on the map, most of it was developed by us and by the families that moved to live here with us thousands of years ago. That came from us. And we get none of the credit for that. Instead, we have a bunch of people trying to crowd us out and brainwashing our men into thinking that we're the problem because they want our mate selection, our genetics, and our culture to look like the problem. In the culture of my mother's people, a man did not have more than one wife unless he was a leader, period. And on top of that, he had to eat last after the children and after the women and after the other men as a daily reminder of humility and his place in the society. The Western indigenous tribes, that was never a part of their culture. With the Europeans and the Africans and all these different people coming here, that has never been a part of their culture. And all of them outnumber us. And none of them are from the families that helped us to make ancient America as great and as technologically advanced as it was. The families coming over now, none of them are the families that helped us to make modern America what it is. A lot of these people of non-color and a lot of these Africans from the families who did not put in the hard work to make this nation what it is, they would still be hanging from trees, hanging by the neck from a rope in the trees if it wasn't for our hard work. They would still have to watch their children and spouses getting murdered in front of them at much greater rates than it still happens now if it wasn't for us. They would be rejected from being allowed to go to college and be rejected from being allowed to go to a school if they're not lighter than a brown paper bag if it wasn't for us. And there are a lot of Asians, they're a lot darker and blacker than I am. So I know their ass definitely would have been segregated. And, there's plenty of signs from the old days that says no Indians and no niggers and no dogs allowed. Why? That's not as prevalent today as it was in the past because of our hard work and these other families that come here from Nigeria. A lot of these families that put in none of the hard work and cursed our bloodlines, they look down on us and call us akatas. They look down on us and call us wild animals. And of the many things that I would like to see change in this world during this judgment period, I would love to see the identity theft, the identity fraud, and the lies about our genetics and our gender ratios in our culture. I would like to see a lot of that stop. And I'm not even 100% sure if any of the higher powers want it to stop. I don't know if they would. Because when I look at the nakshatras for people's family surnames and the nakshatras for their ethnic names and the name nakshatras for their racial groups, what I see emerging is a pattern where some of the same people who's trying to crowd us out and convince our men that there's something wrong with our culture and our genetics and our way as women, the same people who are doing that seem to be highly favored according to the nakshatras of the names for their ethnic groups and for their family surnames. The very people who's just coming with a tsunami of daughters from Europe and Africa and all these other places to crowd us out. The nakshatra seems to imply that they're more favored than us. And it's not our family. It's not our families overpopulating and depleting most of the soils on the planet. We're not the ones doing this, and we're getting replaced. And even Mestizos, who have a lot of ancestry from France, which is one of the biggest offenders on the planet. A lot of Mexican Mestizos, they're of French and Spanish descent. And like I said, they're robbing people blind in money and food, so they won't be a third world country. So they won't have a tsunami of daughters laid up in rundown shacks. and mud huts. You know, and they're replacing us with these Africans and with these Europeans and mestizos who have a lot of offender ancestry from France. And they're just trashing our reputation, trashing our name, and erasing our culture. Our people were not women who had to share their man 100% of the time. Our selective breeding, our culture, our sciences, our astronomy, all of that. It was not the culture of just breeding like ants and being hostile to people. We had international trade. We invented democracy. You know, our people were not hostile people. If men wanted to have 2 or 10 or 30 wives, they had to earn that because we were not birthing a tsunami of daughters. They had to earn it. They had to compete. They had to prove themselves. They couldn't just sit back being some dumb narcissistic asshole running in and out of 20, 30, 50 different women. Our men didn't have the luxury of being some narcissistic, stupid, disease-slinging asshole. They couldn't do that. They had to compete. Our families still don't birth a tsunami of daughters. You know, like my most darkest skin relatives back home in Virginia, who's descended from Chow and Meherrin people, they have very few, almost no daughters. I don't have any sisters. All of my sons are males. I have very few female cousins. On the day that I was born 37 years ago, I was the only female baby in the nursery in the ghetto. There were no other girls. Why? Because we don't birth a tsunami of girls, but some of these families from Europe and Africa and other nations, some of them do. That's why they've succeeded at convincing our men that we're the problem, because they wouldn't have enough to eat if it wasn't for us genetically engineering most of the plants that they grow. A lot of them are robbing other countries blind, stealing millions of tons of food and billions of tons of dollars from poor nations every year because they don't want surnames or ethnic group names or racial names with nakshatras that limit family size and limit narcissism. They don't want that. They don't want the spiritual remedies to fix that. They don't want to change their selective breeding practices to fix it. No, instead, they've come over here, crowded us out, and made it to where 80% of us cannot marry one of our own men who is descended from this land. 80% of us. They've got these guys going half crazy. They've got them in jail sucking dick. They're indoctrinating them with African and Islam and European cultural practices to make them feel like we're a bad woman and we're masculine if we're not laid up with 2 to 30 other women. And I have a problem with it because, again, that's not our culture. That's not the culture of the pyramid builders. That's not the culture of the mound builders. Our men are supposed to compete with each other. If they want to have more than one woman, they're supposed to become a leader and earn it. And we got all these people, all these women, all these men from all these nations all over the world crowding us out because they know that in 40, 50 years from now, their soil is going to be too depleted for them to grow food. So they want to lay up over here and steal our sons and rape them and indoctrinate them. They want to lay up over here, making most of our men, and not solely just TD Jakes, believe that we're too manly and that there's something wrong with us because they need to take the best of what we have instead of fixing what they have in Europe, instead of fixing what they have in the Arab nations and in Africa and in Asia and all these other places. Instead, they're erasing us not solely just culturally, but also genetically. And what I don't know is if any higher powers from any faith system would be willing to make that stop. They can plant as many trees as they want, but planting trees is not going to reverse the depletion of nutrients from the soil. That's why they need our men to be against us and to be laid up with them and their tsunami of daughters. That's why they need it. That's why they need to rob impoverished nations of billions of dollars and millions of tons of food every year. Because they know even if they plant trees in an effort to turn dry, sandy desert into moist soil, they know that's still not going to replace the depleted nutrients. They know that even if they plant trees, that's not going to turn into land they can farm long term. What they need is a better selective breeding practice. They need better national names, better surnames, and better personal names that will limit narcissism and limit overpopulation. And they don't want to do it. You know, this is not just a political crime of genetic and cultural genocide, but it's also a spiritual crime. And the sad truth is that the overwhelming majority of Black people of indigenous descent not only disagree with me, but look at me as if I'm the enemy and as if I'm the problem, and a lot of times won't even associate with me. You know, if I try to speak on even a little of this, the response normally from most indigenous Black people, it's a nasty attitude. And in some cases, I think they probably cursed me too. You know, I can't say anything about this to Black women. I can't say anything about this to white women, because I say this to white girls. Oh, instant attitude, instant nasty attitude if the only thing I say is that our people who are being replaced are less than 12% of the population of America. When I say that, instant nasty attitude. Why? Because it's pointing out the fact that a lot of females are narcissists because they don't care about the high rates at which we're not getting married and at which we've been isolated and at which the high rates at which our men have been killing us, tormenting us emotionally, slandering us, and assaulting us, because they've been indoctrinated by Africans and Arabs and white women to see us and our culture and our genetics as manly, undesirable, and the problem, when it's not. It's the opposite. And I can't even teach this concept to any indigenous Black people, because I think all of the ones who have a following disagree with me, even though it's reality and the truth. It seems like almost all of the ones who follow other indigenous Black people, they disagree with me, even though what I'm saying is factual and the truth. And then with reservation Indians, I see a lot of the same thing, where the men in the reservation Indian tribes who are heavily mixed with French offenders who steal billions of dollars from poor nations and millions of pounds of food every year. These French mixed Indian descendants from Mexico and from the reservations, the Irish mixed, German mixed. I see the same thing from them as what I see on the Black side of the equation, where they're like, oh, well, if colonizers hadn't come here, I'd have 10 wives. That's what they say. And then I'm like, no, the fuck you wouldn't. I tell them I was raised in the culture of my ancestors. I'm like, you wouldn't have no 10 wives. You would have to be a leader and earn it. And most of the women you would have would be women who need a caretaker and who don't have any children to look after them. And unfortunately, I probably would have been one of the ones required to be in a polygamous marriage if anyone wanted to marry me at all. Because my stomach is split from my ribs down to my pelvis. Some of my pelvic bone is permanently gone. And I accidentally damaged my heart a little bit overdosing on ibuprofen and painkillers because I was trying to hold on to a good paying job that I just couldn't handle. I knew that nobody was going to let me keep a lab tech job and that I was just going to be harassed and forced out. And I'm actually a very nice person, and I have my limits emotionally. And after year after year after year of having a lot of abuse, I'm a really different person now from what I used to be. But I'm not a savage, and I'm not mean. I'm not. I'm just saying I'm tired. I'm tired, and I know there's a lot of women out there. They're equally as tired and beat up and worn out as physically and emotionally as I am. And I know that unfortunately, if colonizers had never come here, I would be one of the women who would have to tolerate being in a polygamous relationship if a man wanted one. Someone who really don't love me in reality, someone who really don't give a shit about me in reality, someone who will ration and limit how much penis I can and cannot have because he's got other bitches to attend to. So then, then if I cheated, then I'd have to worry about if he'd cut my stomach open or cut my head off if I cheated because I'm not getting sexually satisfied and I'm not attracted to women. That would have been my life if I had been this damaged physically and also alive before colonizers, because I don't have any children to take care of me. All of my children were stolen, and my children get indoctrinated against me every day. They lie to my kids, but, not solely just the white foster families and social workers, but my relatives lie to my kids too. They lie to my kids saying that I starved them, and that never happened. They lie to my kids telling them that I was a prostitute, and I was never a prostitute. They lie telling my kids all kinds of shit because they want them to grow up and to hate me and to give our future away to people from cultures and from types of families that are not like ours. They want those people to have the first and best of everything, and they're trying to indoctrinate my sons to embrace women who are not like our bloodline so that they can give the women who's not like our bloodline from Europe, Africa, French-descended Mestizo families or wherever, trying to give them the first and the best of everything, and the women who's like our bloodlines, little or nothing at all. There's already a lot of that happening. 80% of the men from our bloodlines, they don't marry us. A lot of them do assault us. A lot of them do kill us. And T.D. Jakes, he was voicing the opinion of most of our men when he said he was trying to make us the root of most of the problems. And not looking at that toxic masculinity imported from other nations where they don't have to earn it. They don't have to become a leader and a caretaker for the elderly and disabled women if they want to have more than one wife. They don't have to become a leader and a caretaker for the widows if they want to have more than one wife, women whose husband died. They will instead, they're already, they murder us and assault us and abandon us at much higher rates than other men because they have immigrant women and immigrant mixed women, whether it's European mixed, African mixed, whatever, that they have these people from these other nations thoroughly convincing them that their struggles, their losses, their family dysfunction, their poverty, and their mental illness, they have them thoroughly convinced that all of it came from us. And then they lay up in jail, sucking each other's dick, fucking each other in the ass, and listening to Islam, listening to Europeans, listening to heavily European mixed Latinos, listening to Africans, and building up anger and rage and looking at us like we're the root cause of their limitation, oppression, and mental illness. That's why we have one black woman who's from this continent, not an African, murdered every 5 hours. That's why we have so much higher rates of domestic violence, abandonment, and murder at the hands of our men. Our men are indoctrinated. These people from these other nations who do birth a lot more daughters than we do, who don't have the culture that made this nation great in ancient times, who don't have the culture that made this nation great in modern times, these people, they have successfully indoctrinated our men with the African culture and way of thinking and in religion, and not ours, which is from the mound builders. They have indoctrinated our men with the culture and thinking and way and being of the Arabs, and not the mound builders, not ours, not the pyramid builders' culture and way of thinking and being. You know, my family don't even have that many females in it. Most of my relatives are dudes. Our gender ratios is not African. Our gender ratios is not European. Our gender ratios are not Asian, and that's why we don't have to abort girls to have sons. Our gender ratios are not French, Mexican, Mestizo. We birth boys. We have enough men to where men have to compete with each other or learn to treat a woman better, or at least we did. But instead of having men that side with us and our genetics and our way of life and our spirituality, the spirituality of the mound builders, the spirituality of Israel, either one, instead of having our men siding with that, they're siding with the women who's not like us, both the ones who do look like us and the ones who don't. And for me, as a person who was raised in my indigenous culture, which we practiced at family gatherings and at every family meal every single night, as someone who was raised in my culture, it might not have been 100% of it, but the basic parts that teach men every day at every meal, their place in society, their place in the tribe, their place in the family. That's what I grew up with. I grew up with that culture. Not this imported shit that favors overpopulation, that favors people who consume the land like locusts, and then convince our men that we're the root of all of their psychological and financial and sexual problems. We have lost the game of psychological warfare. We have lost, and that's why our men kill us and not the African women and not the women of non-color who birth more daughters every 5 hours. That's why we get assaulted at higher rates than any other group of women. And I'm glad I left that life behind. I'm in a safe place now. I'm not surrounded by black men who look at me like as if women with my way of being and my way of thinking is the root of all their problems. I'm not surrounded by that. I'm not surrounded by a bunch of black men who think I need to die or get beat up, assaulted, and never married so that the women from the imported bloodlines who birth more daughters so that they can take my place. I'm not surrounded by that every day because, like, I'm in a white community. I'm not rich. I don't have a lot of money, but I'm in a white community in the lower income part. And I'm here because I can have a cheap rental in a space where I can be alone, and I can be safe. I don't have to be emotionally assaulted. I don't have to be physically assaulted. I don't have to be abused and looked at like as if I'm the root of all the problems, and like as if everything that I say and do is never going to be good enough. I don't have to have a woman like my mother here doing that. I don't have to have a black man here doing that. I'm in this white community. At least I could have a cheap rental in the poorer part of town where I can be by myself. And that even though I face hostility with people trying to call me a nigger or trying to call me monkey mouth because my wisdom teeth shifted my perfect teeth so they're not perfect anymore. So they be calling me monkey mouth from a distance. Even though I've dealt with grown men gang stalking me in the grocery store and on the bus and making veiled threats to my face. Even though I've dealt with multiple churches who basically told me flat out with their actions, we don't give a shit about your spiritual calling and you're going to do and say and be what we want, or you can go die. These people can threaten to kill you and we really don't fucking care. I mean, that's what multiple prophetic churches that have prophetic pastors have told me of both races in town with their actions, with their ignoring, with their dismissal. That's what I've been dealing with when I leave my home. But at least I can say being under a white male patriarchy, I can have a cheap rental and not be inside my home with a woman or a man who wants to look at me like as if I'm the root of all the problems, like as if my genetics and my culture and my emotions is the problem. People who will label everything I contribute as worth nothing. People who will who have assaulted me, verbally abused me, when I was trying to love them, when I was trying to unite with them. I don't have to have that in my home. I don't have to be in my home and to be at risk of being one of those black women who gets killed every 5 hours by a man of her own race because he thinks she needs to die, and not the Africans, not the Arabs, and not the Europeans who birth more daughters and who have a totally different culture. I'm safer from that. Like, white male patriarchy has created a system where I don't have to be laid up with someone who does not love me, who wants to treat me like I'm dog shit stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Under white male patriarchy, yes, I can get help. With having my stomach muscles torn from my ribs down to my pelvis, having some of my pelvic bone gone permanently, and accidentally damaging my heart from trying to hold on to a job that I couldn't handle physically because I was being harassed and crowded out of the job I went to school for. I have relief from all of that under all this white male patriarchy system. And the sad truth is that even though they're oppressive, I know if these Africans and these Arabs and the Mestizos were the dominant patriarchy system, I know there would be just not as much chaos, if not 10 times more. It'd be just as bad, if not 10 times more, and I wouldn't have the option of having my own separate space without another female to abuse me emotionally and drag other people into it and value everything I do at zero or assault me when I am trying to be friendly and be loving and unite. I don't have to have that in my home with me. I don't have to be messed up physically and have a man who thinks most women from our bloodline need to die or be abandoned. I can say that even though white people have been the top dog and the big bully on the planet, in the systems of these other cultures, I would not have access to a space of my own Not unless I wanted to sleep outdoors. I wouldn't have a place of peace. You know, there's a lot of West Africans, they still practice chattel slavery. Some of their own people drowned to death working as slaves. There's Asian people where they don't always pay their people pennies on the dollar every day. Some of them just don't pay their people at all for the work they do. Your husband could be going to work every day and he gets electrocuted to death because of negligence. What happened at one of at the property of one of my ex stepdad's friends. You know, my ex stepdad's friend, they were Asians, and so a man got electrocuted on his property because of negligence, a male employee, and they paid no restitution to that man's wife and kids. It left her and the kids to just fend for themselves. So even though they're not practicing chattel slavery to the extent of Africans, what they do to a lot of their poor people is very close to it in a lot of cases. And I know that even though people have made death threats, stolen my children, lied to them, and gay raped them under this white male patriarchal system, I know that if Africans or Arabs were at the top, they would do 10 times worse because they're doing it in their nations. Arabs are still practicing chattel slavery too. And in their tradition, they cut off a male slave's penis and his balls to be sure that he's not going to breed. That's their culture. That's their tradition. And in Indian country with the reservation Indians and also with Black people of indigenous descent, the men and a significant number of the women too, they're all over it. Like, oh yeah, that's got to be our culture. Those are our guys. They're more like us. And the Western tribes, whose culture is not like the indigenous culture I was raised in at all, they practiced chattel slavery too, just like these fucking Nigerians. With the people who's the pyramid builders of North and South America and Egypt, my Black ancestors from these nations and also from Israel as well, that's not our way. That's not how our people did things, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not misinformed. That's not the culture I was raised in. And sometimes dealing with this and dealing with being surrounded by people who were not raised in a culture like the one I was raised in, you know, being with people of both genders who don't relate to me at all, sometimes it feels like being in a nightmare that I haven't been able to wake up from the day that my mother moved us out of my hometown. And then, like, even with my hometown where I grew up, I can't even afford to fucking live there. Other people who have no education in advanced sciences, they done took over the department that I used to work in, crowded me out, committed fraud in my files, and got rid of me. You know, it had me in so much pain that I was in physical pain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Had me working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week and got rid of me. You know, did permanent damage to my body that can only be fixed with a combination of surgery or miracles. Yeah, they ain't got no science education and they took over the whole department. And even though they have problems bad enough where they got to shut down for a couple of hours every night and call a remote site, they still dominate the department because the only thing that matters to them is just having Africans and Europeans and Mestizos in those jobs who have no science education, except for maybe one or two people. It took me 6 years just to find someone who would let me have a job interview in the field I went to school for. And then that's the shit I got hit with when I got in. My Reiki instructor, who taught me the Japanese technique for healing by laying on hands, he had zero education in science. And the most prestigious pharmaceutical company in the country, Eli Lilly, they gave him a job as a lab tech with no education in science at all. They just got one or two people in there who have education in science. They have a remote location that they can call in on the phone if there's a problem or they don't know how to fix something. And these are the types of people who have crowded me out of the jobs I went to school for most of my life, where I can't pay my student loan debts. I have student loan debts that I cannot pay because for all these years, I had to struggle just to get 2 job interviews and then to get permanently injured with multiple damages to my body and sent away with no workers' compensation. All this just so they can guarantee the stability of people who's not qualified. And so now that I have debt that I'm not able to pay, I'm looked at as a thief. I'm looked at as dead weight and a loser and a stain on society because people who's not qualified is being protected and kept in those positions all over the country. And that's why I can't pay my student loans. That's why I'm looked at like as if I should be robbed of my children that I did not birth until after age 30. That's why I was looked at like as if I should be the one who's emotionally tortured and thrown into homeless shelters and thrown onto the streets to sleep outdoors. And even though I went through even though so many years of my life was just a nightmare, under this white male patriarchal system, unfortunately, at least I've had access to at least some help instead of being under Africans and Arabs who practice chattel slavery and Mestizos who just do horrific things to their own people. I don't have to be under their government and have no access to even a little help at all. Like dealing with, like I said, what I've been through has been a nightmare, but I know it would be 10 times worse if these other people were in charge of everything, and then my hope would go from slim to zero. I'm not white. I'm not whitewashed. I was raised in the culture of indigenous women who were not white, and this other shit that Black Indian people and reservation Indians and Mestizos and Europeans are trying to serve up to me while they crowd women like me out. I don't want that shit, that steaming pile of shit that they're trying to serve up to me as right and natural and the way things should be. No. Sometimes I'll be thinking to myself, no, my bloodline doesn't need to change. We built up a lot of this ancient stuff that y'all take credit for while erasing us from history and erasing us genetically. We built up a lot of these foods that support your neighborhoods and your countries all over the world. I'm like, we did this and y'all erasing us genetically and culturally in the Black Indian community, in the reservations, in just all over, in the white community, everywhere. And I'm like, no, we're not the problem here. And this spiritual system that favors the people who's the root of most of the problems, I wish I knew how that could be corrected. And I don't know. I really don't.